Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special edition of Behind the Curtain on the Nittany Sports Now Network. We are live on YouTube and Facebook. We are bringing you the Land Grant Trophy pregame show. I'm Jarrod Prugar along with my man, Paul Murphy, or as affectionately known as Murph. Murph,
Hey,
let's get after it. Prestigious battle on the or prestigious trophy is on the line tonight. It is the most beautiful piece of artwork for anybody. And I just recently found out that it has its own handler. Will that handler be spending some time in Happy Valley after tonight's game? That remains to be seen. But tell me your thoughts on what you think about the Land Grant Trophy.
that's the ugliest piece of hardware I've ever seen in my life. I was detecting the sarcasm meter there, but obviously, if you follow the feeds that you see on Twitter and all the news articles and stuff, it is the most beautiful piece of art that ever could come across the valley.
Honestly, it could be in the Louvre. Um, typically I don't get to talk about a lot about trophies. It's not like Penn State wins very many outside of bowl games. I've seen the Big Ten trophy. It's got nothing on that. But let's get after the game here. It's at Ford Field. It's a Friday night, which is a little bit different than what we're used to, what Penn State is used to. But I still don't think that that's enough to deter the Nittany Lions against the Spartans tonight.
No, I don't think so. I think what remains to be seen, and I haven't really been touching up on things today, but my assumption is that Allah is going to get the start today. And I was kind of curious to see if Prabula was going to get some more playing time today in this game. I think we saw last week that Prabula comes in and he presents just a whole different challenge to a defense. Allah, to his credit, and how he gets hurt was running the ball, something he really hasn't done all year, pretty much up until the Michigan game. But Penn State's coming in here. I mean, the defensive standings and the rankings, are like the laundry list of who's who in defense this year. Number one in sacks, number two in total defense, number two in yards per game. I think they're like number three in yards per play. And then you got Michigan State, excuse me, coming in here, and they're just absolutely atrocious on offense. Um, I think they're ranked like 124th or 125th in scoring offense. So and amazingly, Penn State is like still in the top 15 in scoring offense. It's sluggish, and I mean, granted, they're no Iowa. I'll give you that.
Hey,
But
Iowa got the win. They are at 10
uh,
wins. They are at
they
10 wins, and I think they've hit the under in almost every one of those wins.
isn't
They
that
the,
terrible?
the under was under 27 and a half at one point today, and they hit 23. It was in danger there for a minute. It was 10-10, and then they had a last second field goal to win 13-10. And what's crazy is, you talk about Penn State's offensive coordinator woes with Mike Yursich, and now it's Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell. But Iowa has played almost the entire back half of their season knowing their offensive coordinator is done after the bowl game. And they've still not only won, they've won 10 games. Yes, their offense is abysmal, and they are just winning by the skin of their teeth. But yet they're 10-2, just like Penn State has the potential to be. And their offensive coordinator is gone, just like Mike Yursich was.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this, Jared, if you go back and look over the last few weeks, and this kind of all started, as you know, when they went to play Minnesota, they set a record for the lowest over under in a collegiate football game, and since that time, they have beaten it two or three more times. In fact, a few days ago, when I was on checking my parlays and stuff, it was at 24 and a half is what I had seen on FanDuel. It wasn't there very long, from what I understand. But Iowa is the first team to win their division and be the team in that division that has scored the least amount of points. Like, it's absolutely mind boggling. They are dead last in the NCAA in total offense. Their defense, obviously, we know they're top 10. But it's something you don't see. It's almost like a fantasy football type of a deal there, where your team really lousy and they just keep winning by a couple or 3 points. But here they are, going to match up next week in Indianapolis against either Michigan or Ohio State. Um, They don't have a prayer in that game, from what I know, from what I've seen, from what I predicted. But that's why you play the game.
Yeah, that will obviously be determined tomorrow. That game is, I think all eyes are going to be on that. It's a noon kickoff. And they've, I've seen all over Ohio State. One of the funniest things, I think, one of their assistants was up for the Broyles Award. He's a semifinalist. And the graphic, of course, in Columbus, they don't believe in the letter M. They cross it out for everything. So it did look like he was a sex finalist, which is probably the least scandalous thing to happen at a Big Ten institution throughout this whole football season. But for Penn State, they're right where they want to be. They are 9-2 heading into this game tonight against Michigan State with an opportunity to go to 10 wins. If they get to 10 wins, they will almost assuredly be in a New Year's Six bowl game. Selfishly, I want them to go to Atlanta. No offense, as much as I'd like to go on, live in Phoenix, Arizona, or wherever. Glendale, Arizona, I think is where University of Phoenix Stadium is, if that's even the name of it, the big toaster in the desert. As much as it would be fun to do a live podcast in person with you, Atlanta, I think, is a little bit cheaper. And it's somewhere that Penn State hasn't been yet.
Well, it's cheaper for you. It's definitely not cheaper for me, since I'm 25 minutes away from the stadium, though. But you were here before when Penn State was in the Fiesta Bowl against Washington. I think in 2019.
Yeah, Saquon Barkley's last game.
Yeah, 2019.
And, you were with me when we were together when I had to write about Saquon Barkley declaring for the NFL draft.
Yeah, yep. And I took you to the Princess in Fairmont for the press conferences, and
yeah, you're my chauffeur. It was great.
That's right. I was your chauffeur. I was your Airbnb for the day, and it was all free of charge.
Yeah, it worked out really, really well. Yeah.
So don't tell me what's cheaper.
I know it's cheaper for me. It might not be cheaper for you. You're out there in the desert with the sun. I'm up here in the Northeast where it's cold.
Yeah, it's a little cold today. It was a little cold yesterday too.
It's in the 50s.
Yeah, it's only a high of like 64 today, 65. It's a little chilly.
It's dry, chilly air. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm obviously I'm like you there. I'm a little bit biased to myself. Would like to see them come here. I would love to see them match up against Oregon or Washington. And that's an interesting storyline to watch there. With the bowl game selection coming up, like who do they play? Penn State Tulane game does really not excite me. A Penn State Alabama matchup would be pretty cool to see. Penn State Missouri, I'm looking at the rankings. I see Louisville and Missouri are both ahead of Penn State. That's probably the two teams I don't agree with at this point. That should be ahead of Penn State.
Louisville lost to Pitt. Let's be real.
But I think they're going to go and take care of business today, even if they can't get their offense going again. I mean, their defense is going to be there for them against Michigan State. So you're looking at 10-2 after today. And I know it's going to come down to, I don't know how they run the selection thing like they used to do, or, it went in by priority and order and who would take whom. And obviously the Peach Bowl, if they got a chance to take Penn State, they're definitely going to take Penn State.
Right, and that's the thing. I think I did a story for NSN with the Peach Bowl CEO and president, and they mentioned that Penn State has never played in that game. And if Penn State, I mentioned this on the Lashing Out podcast, if Penn State wins, they become the first team to win all 6 New Year's Six bowl games, which I think is a great feat regardless. And James Franklin has gotten them to half of them. He's gotten them to the Rose Bowl twice, the Fiesta Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, and what could be the Peach Bowl as well. And that's 4 out of 6. Right, other than the Sugar Bowl and the Orange Bowl. And, the Orange Bowl would be great. I think that would be awesome in a situation to go down to Miami for New Year's. I think that would be awesome someday. But Atlanta, I think, presents good opportunity. And for Penn State and the Peach Bowl, they align really, really well together. Penn State obviously has Thon and everything that they do to raise money for childhood cancer. And the Peach Bowl is the only charity-driven bowl game. It's the one that they've donated tens of millions of dollars to childhood cancer research. And they have a study for leukemia coming to Pittsburgh Children's Hospital here within the next few months for a trial. So I think, it's weird to talk about kind of morals and things lining up that way. But as far as that goes, for Penn State in the Peach Bowl, it makes sense. Now, a Penn State Missouri Peach Bowl is, I think, intriguing, solely for the Altoona aspect of you have a Detweiler as a featured twirler, Courtney Detweiler and her sister, and her both went to Penn State, but Mackenzie twirled at Penn State, was in a touch of blue. So when you look at that, I think is a unique tie-in as well. But for me, getting to the Peach Bowl is good. Tulane is kind of meh. It's just like Penn State and Memphis in the Cotton Bowl a couple years ago. But for me, just get to 10 wins and let the cards fall where they may, and see what happens there.
Yeah. So Jarrod, on that, looking ahead to the bowl game, and as you know, last week was senior week. We saw a lot of seniors, running out for the last time, and there are still some undecideds that are a little bit interesting. And I'm thinking this through myself and such. So Chop Robinson's one of them. Obviously, he has not made his decision yet on whether he's coming back or not, as is Kalen King. Now, you take those two at the beginning of the year, and now you take those two at the end of the year. Chop Robinson is still on the same level as where he started the beginning of the year. So he's going to possibly be a mid first round pick. Like, we're looking at 12 to 20, somewhere around in that neighborhood. Kalen King has gone from a possible top 15, perhaps, to, I think, falling into the mid to late second round. Ever since the Ohio State game, and Kalen King has not been the same, and I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But you got to look back at last year when you had Joey Porter.
It's the same situation, yeah.
Exactly. And, Mr. Clutch and Grab Porter,
he was exposed against Ohio State.
He definitely was. He definitely was. And then, he fell in the first round this year. Of course, of all teams, we all know where he ended up, much to my pure bliss and enjoyment. But Kalen King was kind of taking the team's second receiver. When they went to a man-to-man, Porter was on the number one guy. King went to the two guy. Well, King had a heck of a year last year. And now King is the guy. And for the first half of the season, he did pretty well. He did well. But lately, it's not as bad as the Sean Wade, when Jahan Dotson kind of put him out to pasture with that one game, and he was never the same after that. While King's not as bad as that, ended up with Sean Wade at Ohio State, I think that he's got some searching to do. Does he want to come back? So let me ask you this: in looking at who might come back, who may not, I wonder how much of this will Chop Robinson and Kalen King have some sort of emphasis or look at who they bring in to being the new offensive coordinator. Is it somebody that they're excited about, that they think can turn this around in a season to give them one more shot? Or if it's not, I can possibly see in both of them going. Now, they're in good hands, especially with Chop Robinson. You got, Danny Sutton coming up. He's going to step right in. He's had a great year. But it's going to be interesting to see here moving ahead with the bowl game. And to that point, do they even play in the bowl game?
Yeah, and that's the thing I think we're going to see the most, right? Are they going to play? Who are they going to play? And I think it's kind of wild, right? Like years ago, that wasn't it wasn't an issue. Now it is. I think Chop Robinson. Oh, I think also you got to look at what Manny Diaz decides to do. Is Manny Diaz staying? Is Manny Diaz going? Does he bolt for a greener pasture? Maybe not a greener pasture, but for another head coaching job. And James Franklin has made it a point to mention that they are willing to do whatever it takes to pay Manny Diaz. And I absolutely agree. Manny Diaz is a guy you cannot let leave. They struck gold when they hired him to come in from Brent Pry, whose defense was not bad. Brent Pry had a very, very good defense for the most part. But then you bring in Manny Diaz, and he took that up to another level. And Penn State's offense wasn't terrible. I mean, at times it had some really rough patches under Kirk Shiraka. And I think, going back to what we talked about a couple podcasts ago, when Yurcich was fired, the effort and what Manny Diaz has done to that defense has ultimately resulted in now you got to do the same thing on offense, and that's why Yurcich is no longer
Agree.
around. He's hanging out with Jimbo Fisher, dialing up some plays somewhere on the unemployment line. But for me, you look at it like that. Penn State's offensive coordinator. I would not be shocked if it was Joe Moorhead. I don't know if that's the right move, so to speak. So there's a lot that can be determined between now and that time whenever they hire an offensive coordinator. I would imagine they want to do it at ASAP. Every time that they made a coordinator change, it has been done before the bowl game. They have been there for install and everything like that. So I would imagine that decision is going to be coming sooner rather than later. After Saturday, Sunday is going to be a dark day, probably Friday or Monday as well, as coaches get fired, and then the silly season starts. But for Chop Robinson, I think he would, I think he'd benefit from going to the NFL. He's another strong guy on the defensive line, and would continue that at the next level. You're right. I think he is a mid first round guy, late first round guy, if not early in round two. And Kalen King, you got to look at it like his brother is also still there too. So that I don't know if that's going to be a determining factor. As his brother Kobe is starting to develop some skills and to really start to turn some heads. It's almost like they picked up where the other left off, so to speak. You didn't really hear Kobe's name early in the season. Now you're hearing it quite a bit. So, whereas you're hearing Kalen's name for the wrong reasons. I would expect Kalen King to probably stay. I don't necessarily see the benefit in him going early or going when he could. But again, that's kind of goes back to, can I make more money here as well in NIL, or do I? At least that's kind of more of a guarantee than going to camp and seeing what you're up against. Or it depends on how they grade out.
Yeah. I mean, you make a very good point about Diaz, and as you know, when the Yurcich, and I've never been a big Mike Yurcich fan. I just, he came in here, the expectations I think that were have not been met with Yurcich, and he was at Texas. I know he was at Ohio State, and he was at Texas and stuff. But when you're in the Big 12, I mean, let's face it, they don't play defense in the Big 12. So you can do whatever you want on offense there and pretty much get away with it. Now you come into, let's be honest here. The top three teams in the Big 10, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, most are ranked 1, 2, or 3 in the major categories on defense. Now you throw Iowa into the mix. So you basically got 4 of the top 10 defenses in the country, all in the same conference. So now
and
you're
also the
bringing
worst
in
offense.
right. And now, so you're bringing in the USC's, the Washingtons, the Oregon's, UCLA without Chip Kelly, perhaps. So when you look at that, I agree with you. They got to do what they need to do to keep Diaz. I think he's doing a great job recruiting, and Barnes has done a heck of a job with this defensive line as well as the recruiting aspect from that point. So offense, where do you go? My first knee-jerk reaction is this offense hasn't been the same since Joe Moorhead was here. And last week, we saw when Bo Prugar came into the game, the dynamics of that offense changed, like within 2 series. I mean, the very first play, Prugar 40-yard gain right off the bat. So then you saw Singleton getting some holes, and they actually got him to the outside for a change. And the problem is that you have a quarterback like Drew Aller. Here's a 5-star, number 2, number 3 quarterback in the country, pro style. You bring in a Joe Moorhead, that is definitely a square peg in a round hole. There's no question about it. So now you got to look at things like, what has gone on behind the scenes here. I don't think that James Franklin, for all the people, he has his detractors and whatnot, but I would like to think, I should say, that James Franklin had a discussion with Drew Aller before this went down and let him know this is going to happen. If this does happen, what are your plans? Now, you got a Prugar, and behind him, you got Jackson Smolik. Franklin has had nothing but great things to say about Jackson Smolik since he stepped on. In fact, he called him the biggest surprise at camp. You got Ethan Grunkemeyer coming in right now. You got Malik Washington, the 2025 class, who's going to be a pretty good dual threat QB as well. Now he's announcing He's down to 5 teams, I think, at the beginning of January or December. He's going to announce his top 5. So all those guys are in the mold of a Trace McSorley, Sean Clifford led offense. And that's when Penn State has been the most effective. Now, with Clifford and with McSorley, your offensive line, going back to Barkley, actually, you can run this back to Barkley when he was there. But their offensive line was just not very good. Not very good at all. This year, they were supposed to be really good, and they're mid. You got Fascino. Now you got, Norzad, I think, has done a really good job this year. Caden Wallace has been, he's got more ups and downs than the Steel Phantom McKinney would this year, watching him. And now, Tanguel getting hurt and having to retire, that obviously didn't help matters. So I don't know. What do you do with an outlier if you bring in a guy like Joe Moorhead? My
And would he
first reaction,
transfer? That's
well, that's what I'm thinking. I can't see him sticking around for an offense that's not going to fit what they want to do if they go this route.
well. At the same time, I'm sorry to interrupt you. For Aller, was he being held back by Yursich? We have not heard anything about Mike Yursich that has been positive really in 2 years. It's not like Drew Aller comes out and says, "Yeah, I love Mike Yursich." Like, you look at social media, and Penn State is pretty tight-lipped when it comes to social media and their players. They really don't make any statements or bold statements, but not a single one of them came out in defense of Yursich when he was fired. That, I think, to me, speaks volumes. I don't know if they were instructed to do that, but even if they were, I think they would still take that one. Hey, he's our guy. He's this guy. Hell, even Eddie Faulkner for Pittsburgh came out in defense of Matt Canada. So not a single person came out in defense of Mike Yursich. Who they did come out in defense of was Danny O'Brien, who's the GA for the quarterbacks. So that, I think, speaks volumes there. Fortunately for him, now he's the quarterbacks coach, which I think is a good move. So you've got that. You can look at kind of the Christian Hackenberg, right? He played behind an absolutely awful offensive line. He was just, and that ruined him. I think Drew Aller is a little bit more structured. The offensive line is much better with him in front of him. I mean, it can't be any worse than what they had under Christian Hackenberg. But talking to Christian, a couple times here, he does kind of think about what it would be like to play under Joe Moorhead. And I think Joe Moorhead is a guy that can really tailor the offense to suit those needs. Obviously, they knew they had Trace McSorley behind Hackenberg. He took over for Hack
in the bowl game.
Hack was hurt in the Tech Slayer Bowl. That was my first bowl game.
Against Georgia.
The first time that I covered Penn State football. So you see that. Obviously, that's fits in really, really well. Now, I think Drew Aller's a little bit more athletic than we give him credit for. But I also think he's been hurt and hindered by the way the offense has been called. If you have an offensive coordinator that is going off script and off game plan, that's never a good situation. And again, we talk about this quite a bit for those that are listening. And if you are listening on YouTube, we appreciate you. Feel free to leave us a comment and we'll answer it to the best of our abilities. But, I think for Aller, it's kind of like Kenny Pickett. You want to see him outside that offense, and outside that, is he bad because of this? I'm not saying that Drew Aller is bad, but in the instance of Pickett, is he bad because of his offensive coordinator, or is he just bad because of whatever, right? So now for Aller, was he being held back by that offense, or is he now going to be allowed the chains will break free? I guess is a way to put it. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And will he go elsewhere, right? If he's committed to the university, and mentioned that he's in that aspect, then I think they're in good shape. But if he was committed because of Yursich, which I don't necessarily think was a great option, then we'll see what happens. And I think that could be something that ends up being an interesting storyline between now and the bowl game.
Yeah, and one thing I left out there is they just got the number 1 recruit out of Colorado to commit last week, literally 2 days after their game, when Yursich was fired on Sunday. And
when he was there and Yursich wasn't in meetings. And that's kind of when he knew things were going differently.
Correct.
So
correct.
That's a pretty telling sign and signal, for a guy like James Franklin to do that, or maybe Yurcich skipped out on those meetings. Who really knows?
Right. Well, and I think Jared, I think the struggles we've seen. I think we're obviously we're here on the eve of just a few moments away from kickoff in the last game for the regular season here, but you've taken into a fact of the usage factor. You've taken into the fact the offensive line hasn't exactly been what it needs to be. You take into a fact that these wide receivers, especially the transfers that come in, I mean, let's be honest, they really haven't. I know Dante Cephas has had a couple decent games in the last 4 to 5.
But he
That's
doesn't know the playbook.
yeah, that's what I've been hearing too. Like, guys aren't showing up, guys aren't going to the meetings, or they're in the playbook. So outside of that, I mean, you've got receivers, you got offensive line, you got Yurcich, you got so there's a combination of things here that obviously it does fall back on Aller because that's the focal point. That everybody blames the quarterback, the backup quarterback. I've been critical of Aller with his decision making. Like some of his passes, I'm like, can you not throw the ball more than 3 yards past the line of scrimmage? I mean, as if I were a Steeler fan, which I'm so glad I'm not, if you watch your Penn State Nittany Lions on Saturday, and then you watch Kenny Pickett on Sunday, especially last week. I mean, the last 3 games Kenny Pickett has played, it's been like Drew Aller season. Like it's
Mhm.
got worse every single week, and he's throwing the ball to nobody. I mean, so they're like a mirror image of each other there with what's going on. So I, when I said last week when they brought in Prugar, that there's an RPO and where you can still pass out of it versus keeping the ball and running as a quarterback or giving it to your running back. And we see that it makes the defense kind of hesitate a little bit. Where's he going to go? Or is he going to pull back? Is he going to throw? And the criticism coming out then last week was I see all these people saying, well, Prabula doesn't throw because he can't throw. He can't throw. How do you
He
know he
hasn't
can't
needed
throw?
to.
The guy has thrown 17 passes in his career. When he comes into games like all season long, Penn State's already up by 3, 4 touchdowns. He was in there to cover the spread. Let's be honest, and that's what he did. He did it again last week. So,
Hmm.
what do we have? We don't really 100% know. I think you hit on a very good point there that maybe we don't really know what we have yet because we don't have the offensive coordinator that was willing, from what I've seen, from what I've read, and it seemed to come back where he just wasn't willing to make the adjustments. It was his offense or none. And of course, we see where that went here. Maybe a little bit too late. We don't know that for sure. But another thing you brought up there too, if any of the listeners on here, throw some questions out here for us. We're open for anything, whether it's Penn State football, NFL, college in general. Throw a
Little
comment out
League,
there. And
he's used to the second place trophies for those. That's for sure.
what's that again?
I said Little League trophy. We can talk Little League. He's used to the second place trophies for those. I
There's
got to
still.
throw that jab in there. If any of the people that are listening, remember our famous battles on 9th Street. But you're right. I mean, that's the thing. You just don't know what you've got, right? Um, for Penn State and Drew Aller, it's different. Um, and when your receivers don't get separation, like Penn State, let's be real. Penn State's 2 competent offensive performances from being 12-0, having an undefeated season going into this point. They could be 11-0 heading into the Land Grant Trophy game, playing for the Big Ten title, if they had any semblance of competent performance.
If we
Now,
had
is that
Marvin
Yurcich's fault?
Harrison.
Like, yeah, and you take that out of the game and you actually have an offensive performance that is competent in either of those 2 games, even with the performance that Marvin Harrison had, like things go well for Penn State. But now, unfortunately, they're 9-2, same song and dance as before. People want Franklin fired. They want to throw him down the Susquehanna River. They just want him gone. They want him to be like the deer on I-99 that won't get out of the way, and they're going to hit him and they're drive right through him. Right, it happened to me coming back from a Penn State game a couple weeks ago. But and I've had this conversation with a lot of different people. Penn State. There are only 10 teams that they don't wish they were Penn State right now. It just so happens, and you mentioned this, and you alluded to it. They play in the same division and same conference as 3 of the other best defenses in the country: Iowa, Ohio State, and Penn State, or in Michigan. Regardless of whether Michigan knows what's coming or not, they're still a pretty good defense. Um, and that's the thing. You just don't know what you've got with this offense because I think they were kind of hampered by Mike Yurcich. So now it raises that question. Well, what do we have? What do we have? And I think you're not going to see things in 2 weeks. You're just not. It's not feasible.
No.
You're not going to see a completely different game plan. It's not possible. This offense has been installed for 2 years now. You're not going to get this severely off the right track onto the right track in 2 weeks time. That's not fair to the coaches. That's not fair to the players either. But that's one of those situations where now over the course of the bowl prep, see what happens. And I think the bowl game is going to be a very, very good indicator of what direction Penn State wants to go. Will they have a coordinator by then? I would imagine so. But
I think they're going to have one within, I'm going to guess and say 2 weeks after the end of the season.
I think by the time the Army-Navy game comes on in 2 weeks, that they will have an offensive coordinator because we have the early signing period and we have all kinds of things with recruiting and the end of the season wrap up. In the transfer portal. The transfer portal is just as important as actual recruitment now. And I think you got to see what you've got, who's going where. Last night I was watching the Egg Bowl, which was an actually impressive game, but Ole Miss ended up winning 17-7, I believe. Heard Kevon Lee's name. He plays for Mississippi State, right? So that was a name I hadn't heard in a while. But or who's going to leave? Or one of the running backs going to leave? Will there be receivers at transfer? Because remember, these are not Marcus Hagen's guys. These are Taylor Stubblefield's guys. And if he wasn't doing the things that he should have been doing, definitely wasn't recruiting well, which is why he ultimately got the axe. But now, next year is going to be a really eye-opening year. Between now and spring ball, I think are going to have to be kind of a renaissance for Penn State offensively. See what they've got, see what's coming, see what's next. And find that offensive identity because under Mike Yurcich, they don't have that identity. You can rely on Sean Clifford in a lot of his experience, and I think they ran a lot of things that Sean Clifford was comfortable running. Are they doing that? He also had competent receivers, and that's not something that Drew Aller has had this year.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on the running back situation there, and we all know that compared to last year and this year, there's a huge drop off in the production coming out. Last year when I watched Singleton and Fat Man, they each had their own respective ways. Katron Allen was more like the grind it out, move the sticks type of guy. You're 3 yards in a cloud of dust guy. Well, Singleton was like Dave Kingman. He was like your big home run guy, and we saw that last year. Well, of course, we all know this year the resume of the lack of explosive plays and see it. And you watch things. I mean, I have watched Nick Singleton run the ball, and in the game last week, there was a play where he was to run to the left, and the defenders came down in. All he had to do was cut to the left, and he had a huge hole because the linebacker was cheating back over. And instead, he puts his head down and runs straight into the two defenders that are there. And I'm like, where is this guy's vision? Which is the one thing last year I had noticed about Singleton versus Allen. I said, Allen has the better vision, but Singleton's the better running back. Now, this year, I think Allen does look a little faster, but Allen has also picked up some moves. Like, he's got some juke in him that I didn't see last year. Singleton, so, Joe Couch Potato, Joe Fan over here, I'm watching Singleton. I'm like, he's just not getting it done. Well, then this week, James Franklin comes out and says, Nick Singleton's a better running back this year than he was last year. And I'm sitting there like, what does he mean by that? Because his yards per carry is down by like 1.3 or something like that. But he's referring to picking up, his pass blocking, picking up the blitzer, knowing which guy to rotate to. He's talking about catching the ball out of the backfield, things like that. And I understand that that's also part of the progression of being a successful back. But the things that I've seen from Singleton are more of a vision. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of when Trent Richardson left Alabama and he went to Cleveland, and there was so many plays where it was so symbolic, it's similar to what I've seen from Singleton. Where there was a hole, and it was almost like he was trained in his head. That's where you go and you don't deviate. Again, Jared, maybe this is part of your sits, saying, no, you got to keep going to that hole. You got to keep going to that hole.
Hmm.
But
It will be
he was
there.
your
The
running,
play will be
he was
there,
your
right?
running backs coach. Well, Sider was your running backs coach. So maybe Sider's trying to teach him something else, and your says, no, that's not how we're going to do this. Because, like you said, not one other person has come out and said anything. So I think there's a lot more there to what meets the eye.
Hmm.
I'm really curious today to see how things go with the quarterback situation today. And if it was me, and you want Aller to be ready for that bowl game, knowing that he took a hit to that shoulder last week, do you start Prugar today, knowing it's Michigan State? They're lousy. Their offense is lousy. Their defense is lousy. Do we give Aller that break, or do we trot him out there and try to loosen some things up with what they're trying to accomplish with Sider and
Hmm.
Powell calling the plays this week?
That's a good point. Keaton Allen, when he came to Penn State, was a much more polished back. He was the college ready running back. And I think that's one of those situations where you look at it and you're like, okay, like he's the guy. But Singleton was so athletic, and he came from high school. You know, Keaton Allen came from IMG, and there's a little bit difference of playing at IMG than there is of playing in high school, right? Even in Pennsylvania, where high school football is superior, I think, to a lot of other states. There is still a big difference there.
Sure.
But now you're right. Is this what they were being taught? Because Jalen Sider has been pretty content, you know, to talk about being a position coach. He's happy where he's at. He has no issues. Well, earlier this year and at media day for the coaches, when we got to interview them beginning of the season, he mentioned about becoming an offensive coordinator or becoming a head coach somewhere, and that's something that hasn't really been discussed or talked about by him. And since he came to Penn State, and that I thought, it was one of those situations where you're like, well, that was weird, but you didn't think anything of it. Well, now if this is what he was having to deal with, I can absolutely see why he would put that feeler out there and hope that it gets published. Maybe somebody comes and gets him as an offensive coordinator. Now that's the other thing too, right? If they bring in offensive coordinator, is an offensive coordinator going to want their guys? Is he going to want James Franklin's guys? Jawan Sider is a very good one, very good running backs coach. He's produced some pretty elite talent.
He's
Um,
also a very good recruiter too.
an absolutely great recruiter, yeah.
Yeah,
So he's a guy that you cannot lose.
sure.
Um, You've got that. I think also is Ty Howell. I think is okay where he's at. I think that's a good situation for him. Do they go into a co-offensive coordinator role? But yeah, I think there's a little bit of a division between there. And I've said this before. I don't think Yursich ever fitted on that staff. He very rarely did media. Now they very rarely let him, which is probably a good thing because when he did do media, it wasn't always great. But that's coaching, right? So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But I'm very intrigued by the quarterbacks tonight. Drew Aller is not even listed as questionable. He was not on the availability report. He's not listed as out. Only Trey Wallace, Mackay Flowers, and Smith Vilbert were listed as out, and there was nobody listed as questionable. So with that, it seems like all systems go. Now, granted, they do have a month to recover. So that is
Sure.
definitely a plus. But I'm very interested to see how tonight plays out for the quarterbacks, running backs. You mentioned Singleton out of the backfield, and yeah, you're right. There are a lot of different ways to evaluate the play of a running back. But again, James Franklin there's a message behind every statement that he makes, right? Whether he's asking everybody their favorite Thanksgiving meal, whether he's asking Corey Geiger why he's asking a question, no matter what he's doing, there's a message behind that. And that's no disrespect to Corey, but that's just how James Franklin is. Is that message, hey, Nick Singleton, there have been rumors and smoke that he might not be happy. Is this a
Well, did,
situation
did you
where,
catch that last week on the touchdown that Prugar scored on the botch snap, and he went to the sideline, and Franklin was out slapping fives, with everybody, and Singleton just went right by him.
yeah,
Went by him. So that's not a good sign. I mean, I get the team concept and all that, but that kind of sent up a little bit of smoke signals there. I forgot about that until you mentioned Singleton being unhappy, and I can see that. And so is James from State College using coach speak this week trying to smooth that over a little bit by giving him some accolades that aren't
Hmm.
particularly related to his yards per carry.
Right. And seeing, hey, you've developed, you've gotten better, even though you might not seem to think that, because as a player, right, it's a little different. You're not quite sure. Running backs are measured in their stats, but it's so much more than that. It's a blitz pickup here, a blitz pickup there. It's how you pass protect. It's how you run block. You still got to go out and block, and still got to go out and play the game. But yeah, I think there is a kind of a message behind that, subliminal messaging. But again, it's hard to keep two guys happy when they're both playing very well. Now, last year that wasn't a problem. Nobody expected that from them last year, right? They burst on the scene and they made it so that guys like Kevon Lee could out. You know, so now it's seeing that it's growing from that, and they need help at the receiver position. I don't know if that's Christian Driver, Amari Evans, Caden Saunders. I think they're better than guys that they're trotting out there regularly now. Um, that's just kind of the way that it is. But at the same time, see what happens for tonight. Though we'll wrap this up here in a couple minutes. But for tonight, Murph, what are your predictions?
I got 38-13 Penn State. I think I think they're going to get tracked a little bit here in the first half. I'm expecting to see a different team come out here today. I don't know why I really feel that. I haven't really felt that all season. But hey, when you walk into Ford Field and you see Lions on each end zone, I mean the writing's on the wall. You're going to be scoring in both end zones tonight. So I got Penn State 38-13. Uh, and if I had to change anything about that, it might be the 13 that Michigan State will put up because I just don't think they're going to possibly be capable of that. But that's what I got. How about you?
I got them 41-0. I think Penn State's defense comes out to send a message. I don't think Michigan State's offense is worth it. They've played pretty well against pretty abysmal offenses. I do think that they'll start slow, typical Penn State, and I do think that they're going to pick it up in the third quarter. But my thing is, I think they're going to be using the Bo Perbula package a little bit more, take the stress off of Drew Aller. That's how I would handle it. I still want to see more two-back sets. I want to see
Yeah.
Keyshawn Allen and Nick Singleton on the field at the same time, even if it's just as a decoy, right? Give a little smoke and mirrors there, but also use them out of the backfield. Nick Singleton's got really good hands. He's been a punt returner, kickoff returner at times. Go out and make something happen in the passing game because your receivers aren't getting it done there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I even Theo Johnson has had a down year, and we see Tyler Warren, who seems to be going. Tyler Warren was really consistent in the first 8 games of the year. The last 3 games, he's got a case of the dropsies, and he looks. I don't know what's going on there, but he's had a few drops the last few games. But I expect Penn State to come out and whether it's 38-13, 41-0, I don't see it's going to be that big of a challenge for them. So let's jump over to big noon kickoff Saturday, and we've got the war on our hands coming up here between Michigan and Ohio State. As you know, everything leading up to this game, everything over the last 6 weeks that's happened with Michigan, I think this is going to be an absolute. This is going to be a 15-round Ali Frazier fight. Knock him up, knock him down. Well, let's not knock him up. That wouldn't be very good. That's a wrong choice of words.
Yeah, that's probably poor choice of wording.
Yeah,
But
that's
I'll let
probably
it slide this time. This is live though, so we can't really edit that out. Though it was not inappropriate. It was, but continue.
Yes. So I really think that tomorrow is going to. I mean, we all know the Michigan Ohio State battles, and they're fierce and they're contested, and Michigan has had the upper hand as we've seen the last couple of years. I got Ohio State 24, Michigan 23. I'm going.
Oof.
I'm going with the dog this game.
I want Ohio. I don't necessarily want a team to win. This is one of those situations where you root for the officials, um, because both fan bases can be completely in denial. Obviously delusional, especially you look at Michigan and oh my god, I've never experienced anybody more delusional than than people on social media for Michigan right now. So,
You
this is all
talking about
Ryan
Dave
Day's fault.
Portnoy?
Yeah, right. So Portnoy's there, but man,
Yeah.
some of the other ones have been bad. This is all Ryan Day's fault. He's the one that turned them in. Speaking of turning people in, TCU got. You want to talk about no defense? They scored 45 points and lost because they gave up 69.
I
Nice.
saw that. Those are
Um,
Big 12. Those are Big
yeah,
12,
Big
buddy.
12. Damn, like they got smoked. But yeah, so that's the thing there. I like Ohio State. Probably same score, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's going to be evenly matched. Both offenses are okay. They do just enough to win games. Their defenses are both pretty elite. Of course, it helps that Michigan knows what's coming. But again, this is a game that has so many undertones here, and this is a game that everybody's going to be watching. The NCAA, the Big Ten, there's still that hammer is about to come down, and it's going to have to come down pretty quickly because God forbid Michigan wins, they win the Big Ten because Iowa is Iowa, and then they end up in the college football playoff. And what if they're not eligible for that, right? So what if that's a situation too? So we look at it like that. Ohio State win is this is going to pain me to say this. An Ohio State win solves world peace in the NCAA, and it's bizarre to say that, but if they win, Michigan rides off into the sunset, and kind of like James Madison, right? They were fighting for James Madison. They still might end up in a bowl game, which is good for them, but same situation goes. Such is
Yeah.
life. But I got Ohio State winning. I think when you look at the coaching aspect of it, Ryan Day is light years above Sharon Moore, which is not hard because Sharon Moore, man, he's fighting for this guy, my boy, right? And then he runs the football 67 times in a row and runs them right into the golf course across the street.
Well, it's going to be interesting. It pains me to say such a thing because I absolutely abhor Ohio State.
They have looked normal compared to Michigan fans.
Well, exactly, and that's what exactly has come out of this too over the last 6 weeks. Is as I've watched things, and I don't like Ohio State. I hate Ohio State. That's no question. I dislike Michigan strongly. I have taken that and I've kind of, I don't want to say I flipped them around because I still abhor Ohio State. But I never thought I'd say this, but I really do want Ohio State to win this game. I want them to beat Michigan. I want them to shut up Dave Portnoy. I want them to be quiet. Now, this is interesting here, Jarrod. It's like, so you take one of these teams and I have a loss.
Yeah.
And now, as you said, whoever wins this game wins the Big Ten. No question. You're in the college football playoff. Georgia still has to play Alabama.
Mm-hmm. In the SEC championship game.
Yes. So that's going to be interesting. Alabama's come around. So you could possibly be looking at, let's just say you got your Georgia. Let's just say Ohio State wins tomorrow. Ohio State, you got Florida State, who now, without their quarterback, they're over a quarterback. So they're running into a wall now. And now you got a one-loss Michigan team, and then you got to have an undefeated Washington team.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michigan's resume, they didn't really play.
This is where, you're exactly right. This is where the resume comes back to bite them.
Yes, exactly. So you got Washington out there who I'd love to see it. Now I'm not a Michael Penix fan, and all you Penn State fans can understand why we wouldn't want to be a Michael Penix fan. But that team is playing good, but that team has also struggled against some of these other teams to win. I mean, they almost got beat by ASU. I mean, I think right now Juniata College could beat ASU because they are absolutely terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But it just makes for some interesting dialogue here going into the last year of having 4 teams in the playoffs, and it could end up being the most difficult.
Yeah.
In the end, of who do you put in based on resume, based on wins and losses. If Washington goes undefeated, then I would love for Ohio State to beat Michigan and Michigan end up 5th. And that would just be poetic. And
that would be something to see. And then you've got Penn State on the outside looking in. I mean, they're not going to make the playoff. That's a foregone conclusion. But they have 2 losses to 2 teams that could be in the playoff.
Yep,
You look at
exactly.
strength of schedule, that matters too. And I think that's why a win for them assures them of a New Year's Six game. Whether they go out west or go down south remains to be seen. But again, I think Penn State's right where they want to be. They've got Michigan State here in less than an hour. It's going to be an interesting game, to say the least. There's so much at stake, not necessarily for Penn State in this game, but moving forward after tonight's game. They've got the rest of the weekend to see where the cards fall, because there are some tough games ahead of them, both this week and next week. So there's a lot to be determined between now and then. Penn State might have to replace one coordinator. They might have to replace two. They've got to keep their recruiting class. They've got to keep this. They got to do that. And, maybe Jim Harbaugh gets hit with a wiffle ball bat. I don't quite know. But right now, we survived our first live broadcast, our first pregame show. Perhaps this will be coming to you for the bowl game. Perhaps it could be coming to you for any other reason other than just because we want to. But any parting shots? You don't get a curtain call this week because we're on live TV, so you can't just wipe yourself off and come back. We haven't edited that quite yet. But any parting shots before we say goodbye and get ready for the rest of the pregame?
Any parting shots not coming from the college aspect, but coming from the NFL. And, going back to last week, the NFL officiating, as we know, is just absolutely atrocious. And, the Steelers' first play from scrimmage last week, Kenny Pickett has the ball. He's moving backwards. Before he even gets contacted, the ball's over the line. There's a safety. And, as you know, Jarrod, I officiated football, and it's all about positioning. And the second referee that they use in the backfield on the play comes running from 6 yards deep in the end zone to mark the spot. Unfortunately, unfortunately from my end, it didn't come out to bite the Browns in the rear end, and they beat the mighty Steelers on the last second field goal, which was 2 weeks in a row. The parting shot I have there is, they, as like Penn State just left Matt Canada go, and now they got Faulkner running the show there in Pittsburgh.
Penn State has not had Matt Canada. Do not wish that voodoo on us, on people at Penn State.
No, I wasn't going to suggest that at all.
No, but, you just misspoke there when saying Penn State let go of Matt Canada.
Well, I meant the Steelers did the same thing that Penn State did in letting Canada go. So now we're going to come back to, Kenny Pickett. Is he the guy? Is he the guy? From what I've seen of Kenny Pickett has had one good season in his professional and collegiate career. And the one season was a fifth-year senior with Jordan Addison on the other end of like 85% of his targets. So I say this to Steelers fans. You better hope that next year the Steelers go in the draft in the first round and get themselves a quarterback, because Kenny Pickett is not the answer. That's my parting shot.
Of course, my parting shot. I'm very thankful for Turkey Bowl, or for Turkey games. Dallas Cowboys won yesterday. They pulled out a turkey leg for a celebration. I'm very excited to see the fine that is left for Dak Prescott and for the rest of the Cowboys who celebrated. But Micah Parsons is a monster. Still is. There will always be a what if situation for me in Penn State football if Micah Parsons played in 2020. That, I think, is a big, very, very big question mark for that season. But, of course, that would require the Big Ten to have acted in a rational manner. But the whole world didn't act rationally in 2020, and we're still trying to sort that out. But for now, all eyes are on the prestigious Land Grant Trophy. Beautiful, graceful. Thank you for joining us in my faux living room as Murph is festive. For Paul Murphy, this has been Jarrod Prugar on the Behind the Curtain podcast. We thank you, as always, for tuning in, and we'll catch you again soon.
We are.